"Don't take the highway," she said, her voice low and casual, like it meant nothing, like it didn't just slice clean through the silence of the cab, and Ethan Cole's hands tightened around the steering wheel before he could stop them, the leather creaking softly under his grip as rain tapped steadily against the windshield, each drop catching the amber glow of streetlights and stretching into thin lines of gold across the glass, the city breathing slow and distant beyond them, unaware that, inside this quiet yellow cab, something fragile was beginning to crack. Victoria shifted in the back seat, crossing her legs, the soft rustle of her coat brushing against the leather as she leaned forward just enough for her perfume to reach him, familiar and distant at the same time, and in the rearview mirror, her face appeared in fragments between streaks of rain, composed, beautiful, unreadable. A woman who had mastered the art of control in rooms far louder than this one, yet here she spoke like she was invisible, like the man driving her didn't exist beyond the role of getting her from one address to another. "Trust me," she added with a faint, almost amused exhale, "it's better this way." And Ethan nodded once, slow, measured, the kind of nod a stranger gives when he's paid not to ask questions, his cap pulled low, shadowing his eyes, hiding everything that mattered, while the dashboard light glowed dimly, reflecting off the glass, and just beneath it, barely noticeable, a small red that blinked quietly to life, recording, capturing every word, every breath, every truth that didn't know it was being heard. The tires rolled over wet asphalt with a soft hiss as he guided the cab away from the brighter avenue, turning instead into a narrower street lined with old brick buildings and flickering neon signs, the kind of place where people didn't look too closely at one another, where secrets moved freely between passing cars and dim-lit windows, and for a moment, neither of them spoke, the silence stretching, thick but not empty, filled with the steady rhythm of rain, the low hum of the engine, and something else beneath it all, something waiting, coiled tight, and Ethan could feel it in his chest, in the way his breath slowed just enough to listen harder, to catch the shift in her tone before it came. Victoria glanced out the window, watching the blurred city slide past, her reflection merging with the glass, and then she let out a quiet laugh, soft but edged with something sharper, something colder. "Funny thing about men like my husband," she said, almost to herself, but loud enough, always loud enough. "They think money makes them untouchable." And Ethan's jaw tightened just slightly, not enough to show, not enough to break the illusion, but enough that he felt it, deep and steady, like a crack forming beneath polished stone. And still, he kept his eyes on the road, his voice calm, neutral, exactly what a driver should be. "You heading somewhere special tonight, ma'am?" he asked, the question simple, harmless, the kind that passed time without meaning anything at all, and she smiled, though he only caught the edge of it in the mirror. "You could say that," she replied, leaning back, her fingers tapping lightly against her knee, impatient, expectant, unaware that every word she was about to speak was no longer just a passing confession in the back of a cab, but something permanent, something that would not disappear when the ride ended, something that had already begun to change everything. The cab rolled deeper into the side streets, away from the polished glass towers, and into a part of the city where the lights flickered and the sidewalks narrowed, where people moved with their heads down and no one paid attention to a yellow taxi slipping past in the rain. And Ethan kept his speed steady at just under 30 miles per hour, his hands relaxed but precise on the wheel, every movement controlled, practiced, invisible, the way he had trained himself to be tonight, not the man whose name was etched into buildings and contracts, but someone ordinary, someone overlooked, someone who could finally hear what had always been said behind closed doors. Victoria shifted again, pulling her coat tighter around her shoulders as she glanced at her phone, the screen lighting her face in a cool pale glow, and for a moment she hesitated, her thumb hovering over a message thread before she locked the screen and slipped the phone back into her bag, exhaling slowly, as if she had just made a decision she had been postponing for too long, and Ethan noticed that pause, that fraction of a second where certainty replaced hesitation. And something in his chest tightened, not sharp, not sudden, but heavy, like a weight settling into place. "You ever notice," she said after a moment, her voice softer now, less performative, more honest in a way that felt almost accidental, How people pretend everything is fine just because it looks fine on the outside. Ethan glanced at the rearview mirror briefly, just enough to meet her eyes for a split second before returning to the road. Happens more than you would think, he replied, keeping his tone neutral, steady, the voice of someone who had heard stories like this 100 times before, and she let out a quiet hum, as if that answer confirmed something for her, as if it gave her permission to keep going. Outside, the rain picked up slightly, tapping faster against the roof, the rhythm uneven now, like a heartbeat that could not quite settle, and the streetlights stretched longer across the windshield, turning the world ahead into blurred streaks of amber and shadow. And inside the cab, the air grew warmer, closer, the space shrinking around the words that were beginning to take shape. I used to think I loved him, she continued, her voice barely above the sound of the rain, and Ethan felt his grip tighten again, just slightly, his thumb pressing into the worn seam of the steering wheel, grounding himself in something physical, something real. I told myself I did, and maybe at the beginning it was true, or maybe it just felt true because everything was so easy back then. The trips, the parties, the way people looked at us like we were something out of a magazine, like nothing could touch us. She let out a small laugh, but there was no humor in it, only distance. But easy is not the same as real, is it? Ethan did not answer right away, letting the silence stretch just enough for her to fill it, because he knew now that she would, because he could hear it in her voice, the way it had shifted from guarded to open, from careful to careless, like someone stepping too close to an edge without realizing how far the drop was. The cab slowed as they approached a red light, the intersection empty except for a single car waiting in the opposite lane, its headlights cutting through the rain and reflecting across the dashboard. And for a moment, everything stilled, the engine idling, the world holding its breath. And in that stillness, Victoria leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping into something more intimate, more dangerous. Do you know what it is like to wake up next to someone and feel nothing? She asked, not really expecting an answer, not really asking him at all. And Ethan felt the words land heavier than anything she had said so far, not because of what they meant, but because of how easily they came to her, how naturally they slipped into the space between them. And he swallowed once, slow, controlled, keeping his eyes on the traffic light as it flickered from red to green. People change, he said quietly, the words simple, almost meaningless on the surface, but beneath them, there was something else, something steady, something holding, and she shook her head, a faint movement he caught in the mirror. No, she said, firmer now. People reveal who they have always been. We just choose when to see it. And with that, she leaned back again, settling into the seat as if something inside her had finally loosened, as if a door had been opened and she no longer felt the need to close it. And Ethan pressed lightly on the gas, the cab moving forward into the night, the red recording light still blinking quietly beneath the dashboard, capturing every word that would soon become impossible to take back. The road stretched ahead in a long, wet ribbon of asphalt, reflecting the city in broken fragments as the taxi moved steadily forward, and Ethan adjusted the rearview mirror just slightly, not enough to be noticed, just enough to keep her in view, her face calm now, almost relieved, like someone who had been holding her breath for too long and had finally decided to let it go. And that shift in her posture told him everything, because people did not lean back like that unless they believed they were safe, unless they believed no one was really listening. And the truth was, she had never been more heard in her life. I did not always feel this way, Victoria said after a moment, her voice quieter now but steadier, more certain, as if she had crossed a line inside herself, and there was no reason to pretend anymore. There was a time when I thought I was lucky, to have someone like him, someone who could give me a life most people only see in movies. She paused, her fingers tracing an invisible pattern against her knee, slow, absent. But after a while, it starts to feel like you are living in someone else's story, like everything is already decided, every dinner, every trip, every conversation, and you are just there. She let the last word hang, unfinished but understood, and Ethan felt a flicker of something sharper move through his chest. Not anger, not yet, but something closer to recognition, something that pressed against the edges of what he thought he knew. The cab passed under a flickering streetlight, the glow sweeping briefly across her face and then gone again, like a moment that could not hold. And outside, a neon sign buzzed softly, casting a red reflection that slid across the windshield and disappeared into the rain. And inside, the space felt smaller, heavier, the air, carrying the weight of words that could not be taken back. So what changed? Ethan asked, his voice even, measured, the kind of question that sounded like small talk, but carried just enough weight to keep her talking. And she smiled faintly, though it did not reach her eyes. Perspective, she said, a single word, simple but loaded. When you realize that comfort is not the same as happiness, you start asking yourself what you are really staying for. She glanced out the window again, watching the blurred outlines of passing storefronts. And sometimes the answer is not what you want it to be. Ethan's fingers tightened again around the wheel, the leather warm under his skin, grounding him, reminding him to stay still, to stay quiet, to let her finish what she had already started, because stopping now would change everything, and not stopping would change even more. There is someone else, she said finally, the words coming out softer than he expected, almost careful, but not hesitant, not anymore. And the sound of it settled into the space between them like a weight that did not need to be explained, because it explained itself. And for a moment, Ethan did not move at all, his foot steady on the gas, his breathing controlled, the city continuing around them as if nothing had changed, as if the world had not just shifted by an inch that would soon feel like miles. He is different, she continued, her voice gaining a quiet energy now, a kind of conviction that came from repetition, from having told herself this story enough times that it had become real. He listens, he sees me, not just the version of me that fits into a room, but who I actually am. And when I am with him, I do not feel like I am performing. I do not feel like I am replaceable. She paused again, just long enough for the word to land. And Ethan felt that one more than the rest, not because of the accusation, but because of how easily it came, how natural it sounded in her voice. The cab slowed slightly as traffic ahead tightened, a line of red brake lights glowing through the rain like a chain of distant signals, and Ethan eased his foot onto the brake, the car coming to a smooth stop, the engine humming low beneath them, steady, constant, unchanged. And in that pause, in that brief suspension of motion, everything felt sharper, clearer, the silence no longer empty but full, dense with meaning. Does he know? Ethan asked quietly, his eyes still forward, his voice almost lost beneath the sound of rain. And she let out a soft breath, something between a sigh and a laugh. He knows enough, she said, her tone light but deliberate. And he knows I am leaving soon, she added, as if it were already decided, as if it were already done. And Ethan nodded once, slow, almost imperceptible, the movement more for himself than for her, because there it was, the line drawn clean and final, the truth no longer hidden behind polite silence or careful words, but laid out plainly in the back seat of a cab she believed belonged to a stranger, while just inches away, the man she was speaking about drove her deeper into a night that no longer felt the same. The taxi eased forward again as the line of cars began to move, tires rolling slowly over rain-slick pavement, and Ethan kept his gaze fixed ahead, his posture unchanged, his expression hidden beneath the brim of his cap. But inside, something had shifted, not violently, not suddenly, but with a quiet finality that settled deeper than anger ever could, because anger could pass, anger could burn out. But this was clarity, and clarity did not leave once it arrived. Victoria crossed her arms loosely, not defensive, just comfortable, like someone who had already justified everything she was saying. And in the dim light of the passing street lamps, her reflection flickered across the window beside her, merging with the blurred city outside, a figure both present and distant at the same time. You probably think that sounds terrible, she said after a moment, her tone almost conversational, as if she were discussing something trivial, something detached from consequence. And Ethan let out a small breath, controlled, measured. It is not my place to judge, ma'am, he replied. The words simple, expected, but they carried a weight he did not show, a restraint he held onto carefully, because breaking that now would end the moment too soon, and he needed it to continue, needed to hear everything she had chosen not to hide. She tilted her head slightly, studying the back of his silhouette as if trying to read something in the way he spoke, but finding nothing, because he gave her nothing. Only the steady presence of a driver who existed to listen without meaning. And that seemed to reassure her, because she relaxed again, her voice gaining that quiet certainty that came from believing you were unseen. It is not about being a bad person, she said, almost defensively now, though no one had accused her. It is about being honest with yourself, and I have been lying to myself for a long time. She exhaled softly, her fingers tapping once against the seat. I stayed because it was easy, because it looked perfect, because everyone expected it to last. But expectations are not reasons, are they? The question lingered in the air, not really directed at him. But he answered anyway, his tone unchanged. No, they are not. And for a brief second, his voice carried something deeper, something grounded, something that did not quite belong to the role he was playing. And she noticed it, just a flicker, her eyes narrowing slightly in the mirror before she dismissed it, because it was easier to believe in the version of reality she had already accepted. Outside, the rain began to soften, the droplets thinning into a light mist that clung to the windshield, and the city ahead opened into a wider avenue, brighter, cleaner, the buildings taller, more polished, a return to the world she was used to, and Ethan guided the cab smoothly into the right lane, the engine humming steadily beneath them, a constant that did not betray anything about the storm building quietly beneath the surface. He deserves someone who actually loves him, Victoria said suddenly, the words coming faster now, as if she needed to justify them before they could be questioned. Someone who sees him the way he wants to be seen, and I cannot be that person anymore. Maybe I never was. She looked down briefly, smoothing a crease in her coat that was not really there. And staying would only make it worse, for both of us, she added, and Ethan felt the logic of it. The careful structure of reasoning she had built around her decision, each piece placed neatly so that nothing felt like betrayal, only inevitability. The taxi slowed as they approached another intersection, the light ahead glowing yellow, then red, and Ethan pressed the brake gently, bringing the car to a smooth stop, the quiet hum of the engine filling the space between them once more, and in that stillness, he could hear everything more clearly, the faint rhythm of her breathing, the distant sound of tires on wet pavement, the soft ticking of the dashboard clock marking seconds that felt longer than they should. Do you ever regret things? He asked, the question coming out softer than before, not casual this time, not empty, but weighted, deliberate, and for the first time, she did not answer right away, her gaze shifting slightly, her reflection no longer steady, and for a brief moment, something uncertain passed across her face, something that did not fit the narrative she had been telling, but it faded quickly, replaced by that same composed calm. Only when I stay too long, she said finally, her voice firm again, resolved, and Ethan nodded once, slow, almost imperceptible, as the light changed and the car began to move forward again, carrying them closer to a destination that no longer felt like just an address, but a point of no return. The cab moved through the brighter part of the city now, where glass buildings rose clean and sharp against the night, and the sidewalks were lined with polished storefronts that reflected the passing headlights like mirrors, and Ethan felt the shift in the environment as clearly as he felt it. I used to wait for him, Victoria continued, her voice steady, almost reflective now, wait for him to notice things, to ask questions, to see me the way I wanted to be seen. But after a while, you realize that waiting is just another way of disappearing. She paused, her fingers curling slightly against her coat. And I did not want to disappear, she added, quieter this time, but certain. And Ethan felt the words settle into him, not as an excuse, not as justification, but as something else, something closer to truth, even if it was only her version of it. The cab slowed as they approached a long driveway entrance marked by iron gates and soft ground lighting, the kind of place that did not need a sign because the house itself was the statement, and Ethan eased his foot onto the brake, bringing the car to a gradual stop just before the entrance, the engine idling low, steady, unchanged, while everything else inside the vehicle felt anything but. Victoria leaned forward, slightly, peering through the windshield as if confirming the location, and then she nodded once, satisfied. This is it, she said, reaching for her bag, her movements calm, unhurried, like someone stepping into a moment they had already rehearsed in their mind. And Ethan's eyes flicked briefly to the rearview mirror, catching her reflection one more time, memorizing the expression she wore right now, not guilty, not conflicted, but resolved, completely and undeniably resolved. His hand hovered for just a fraction of a second near the dashboard before settling back onto the wheel, the small red lights still blinking quietly beneath the surface, capturing everything, holding every word in place. And for a moment, neither of them spoke, the silence stretching between them, filled only by the faint ticking of the engine and the distant rustle of leaves in the night air. And Ethan realized then that this was the edge, the exact point where everything could still remain hidden, where the truth could stay inside the cab and never follow them beyond it. And yet, at the same time, it was also the moment where everything could change, where silence could become revelation with just a single choice. And he sat there, perfectly still, the decision resting quietly in his hands as the night waited with him. The engine idled with a soft, steady hum, a low vibration that seemed to settle into the bones of the car, and outside the windshield, the iron gates stood still and silent, their black metal lines cutting clean against the soft glow of ground lights that traced the curve of the driveway beyond. And for a moment, everything felt suspended, as if time itself had slowed just enough to let the weight of what had been said finally catch up to the space around them. Ethan did not move, his hands resting lightly on the steering wheel. Now, no longer gripping, no longer tense, just still, as if he had already crossed the line from reaction into something quieter, something deeper, and his eyes remained forward, fixed on the closed gates, though he was not really looking at them anymore. He was looking through them, past them, into a future that had just shifted in a way he could not undo. Behind him, Victoria reached into her bag, the soft sound of fabric and metal barely audible over the faint ticking of the engine, and she pulled out her phone again, checking the screen with a small, almost instinctive glance, and for a second, her expression softened, just slightly, a quiet flicker of anticipation crossing her face before she smoothed it away, returning to that composed calm she wore so easily. "You can stop right here," she said, her voice gentle, almost polite now, as if the conversation they had just shared had been nothing more than a passing moment between strangers, something that would dissolve the second. She stepped out of the car, and Ethan nodded once, slow, controlled, his hand moving to shift the gear into park, the motion deliberate, precise, the click of it settling into place sounding louder than it should have in the quiet. The rain had almost completely stopped now, leaving only a faint mist that clung to the edges of the windshield, softening the world outside into something distant and slightly unreal. And the streetlights reflected off the damp pavement in long, quiet lines that stretched into the darkness. Victoria leaned forward slightly, reaching for the door handle, her fingers brushing the metal, pausing just for a second as if she were collecting herself. And then she hesitated, not because she was unsure, but because something in the stillness of the car felt different now, heavier, more present, like the air itself had thickened with something unspoken. Ethan exhaled slowly, the breath controlled, measured, almost silent, and his gaze dropped for the first time from the road to the dashboard, to that small, steady red light blinking beneath the surface, capturing everything, holding it in place, and for a brief moment, his hand hovered just above it, not touching, not stopping it, just acknowledging it. And then he let his hand fall back to his lap. "Do you ever wonder?" he said quietly, his voice different now, not louder, not sharper, but carrying a weight that had not been there before, something grounded, something unmistakably real. What would happen if the person you were talking about could hear everything you just said? The question settled into the space between them, not rushed, not forced, but placed there with intention, and Victoria froze, just slightly, her fingers still resting on the door handle, her posture shifting by an inch, enough to be felt even if it was barely seen. She let out a small breath, a soft exhale that carried a hint of uncertainty for the first time since the ride began, and she gave a faint, almost dismissive smile, though it did not come as easily as before. "Well," she said, her tone light, but not as steady. "Then I guess it would be better that he did not." She glanced toward the front of the cab, her eyes meeting the reflection in the mirror again, searching, just briefly, for something she could not quite name, and Ethan held that gaze for a fraction longer than he had before, not enough to reveal himself, but enough to let something shift in the air. Outside, a faint breeze moved through the trees lining the driveway, the leaves rustling softly, a quiet sound that filled the silence without breaking it. And inside the car, the moment stretched, delicate, balanced on the edge of something that had not yet been spoken. Ethan straightened slightly, his shoulders settling back, his posture no longer that of someone passing through the moment, but someone standing fully inside it. And though his face remained mostly hidden beneath the shadow of his cap, there was something in the stillness of him now that was impossible to ignore, something that made the space feel smaller, more focused, as if everything had narrowed down to this exact point in time. Victoria's hand tightened slightly on the door handle, not pulling it open yet, just holding it. And for the first time, she did not move forward, did not step out, because something in the question, in the tone, in the quiet certainty behind it, had reached her in a way she had not expected, and the silence that followed was no longer empty, but full, carrying the weight of everything that had been said, and everything that was about to be revealed. The silence held, stretched thin but unbroken, as if the air itself had become aware of what was about to happen, and Ethan slowly lifted his gaze from the dashboard, his hand moving with quiet precision to the brim of his cap, fingers steady, deliberate, and for a brief second, everything slowed, the soft hum of the engine, the faint rustle of leaves outside. Even the distant city noise seemed to fade into something distant and muted, and then, without a word, he removed the cap, setting it down beside him with a calmness that did not match the weight of the moment. Victoria's eyes followed the movement instinctively, her grip tightening slightly on the door handle as her gaze shifted back to the rearview mirror. And this time, there was no shadow to hide behind, no angle to distort what she saw, only the clear reflection of a face she knew better than her own, a face she had not expected, not here, not like this. And the moment her mind caught up to what her eyes were telling her, something inside her stilled completely. Ethan turned slowly in his seat, not abrupt, not dramatic, just enough to face her directly, his expression composed, almost neutral, but beneath it, there was something else, something deeper, something that had settled into place long before this moment arrived. And when he spoke, his voice was not raised, not sharp, but unmistakably his, no longer filtered, no longer hidden. Then maybe, he said quietly, each word measured, grounded, it would have been better if you had chosen your ride more carefully. The words did not echo, they did not need to, they landed exactly where they were meant to. And Victoria's breath caught, not loud, not sudden, but enough to break the stillness that had held her in place, her hand slipping slightly from the door handle as her fingers loosened, her posture shifting by inches that felt like miles, and she stared at him, her expression no longer composed, no longer controlled, but searching, trying to reconcile what she had just seen with what she had believed only seconds ago. Ethan. His name left her lips in a whisper, barely formed, as if saying it out loud might make it less real, but it did not. It only anchored the moment more firmly in place. And he held her gaze without flinching, without looking away, the space between them no longer defined by distance, but by truth. Outside, the faint breeze moved through the trees again, the leaves brushing softly against one another, a quiet sound that filled the background without interrupting what was unfolding inside the car. And the soft glow of the driveway lights cast long reflections across the windshield, framing the scene in a calm that felt almost surreal. Victoria shook her head slightly, a small, instinctive motion, as if she could undo the last few minutes by denying them, her voice unsteady now, no longer controlled. I did not know. I did not realize. She stopped, the words falling apart before they could form into anything meaningful. Because there was nothing she could say that would change what had already been said, nothing she could reshape into something harmless. Ethan listened without interrupting, his face unchanged, his posture still, the only movement coming from the slow, steady rise and fall of his breath. And after a moment, he reached forward, pressing a single button on the dashboard, and the quiet hum of the engine was joined by something else, something unmistakable, her own voice, clear, unfiltered, filling the space around them as the recording played back, each word she had spoken returning to her exactly as it had been said, without distortion, without excuse. She froze completely this time, her eyes widening as the sound reached her, recognition hitting not in a rush, but in waves, each sentence layering over the last, each admission settling into place with a finality that could not be undone. And Ethan did not look away, did not stop the recording, did not say anything more, because he did not need to. The truth was already speaking for him, already filling the silence with everything that mattered. The car remained still, the world outside continuing as if nothing had changed. But inside, the moment had shifted completely, the balance gone, replaced by something stark and undeniable. And as her own words echoed back to her in the confined space of the cab, Victoria's hand fell away from the door handle entirely, her fingers curling slightly in her lap as she sat there, unable to move, unable to escape the reality she had just been forced to face. While Ethan remained exactly where he was, calm, grounded, present, no longer hidden, no longer silent, and no longer someone she could pretend not to see. The recording continued for a few more seconds before Ethan reached forward and pressed the button again, cutting the sound cleanly, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than anything that had filled the car before. And Victoria sat completely still, her eyes fixed somewhere between him and the empty space in front of her, as if her mind had not yet caught up to what had just happened, as if the words she had heard could still be undone if she did not move. Her lips parted slightly, but no sound came out at first. Only a breath that trembled just enough to betray the calm she had held so tightly until now. And when she finally spoke, her voice was softer, unsteady in a way that did not belong to her. "Ethan, I did not mean it like that," she said, though even as the words left her mouth, they felt incomplete, insufficient, unable to carry the weight of what she was trying to reshape. Ethan did not respond immediately, his gaze steady, not cold, not angry, but distant in a way that felt far more final, and he leaned back slightly in his seat, his posture relaxed but grounded, as if he had already stepped beyond the moment she was still trying to hold on to, and the quiet hum of the engine filled the space between them again, steady, indifferent. "Then how did you mean it?" he asked after a moment, his voice calm, measured, not raised, not accusing, but carrying a clarity that made the question unavoidable. And Victoria looked down briefly, her hands folding together in her lap, fingers tightening against each other as if she could gather the right answer from somewhere inside them. "I was just talking," she said, the words coming slowly, carefully, as if choosing them might change their meaning. It was not supposed to be real. It was just a moment. She glanced up at him again, searching his face for something that might soften what she had just heard. "People say things when they think no one is listening," she added, her tone quieter now, almost pleading without fully crossing into it. Ethan's expression did not change, but something in his eyes shifted slightly, not with anger, but with understanding that felt heavier than anything else. "That is usually when the truth comes out," he replied, his voice steady, and the simplicity of the words left no space for argument, no space for reinterpretation, only acknowledgement. Outside, a car passed slowly down the street, its headlights sweeping briefly across the interior of the cab before fading into the distance, and the soft glow left behind only deepened the stillness that followed, as if the world had brushed against them and then moved on without stopping. Victoria inhaled slowly, her shoulders rising and falling as she steadied herself, and for a moment, she seemed smaller, not physically, but in the way her certainty had folded inward, replaced by something uncertain, something searching. "I was confused," she said, her voice firmer now, as if she had found something to hold on to. "I have been feeling lost for a long time, and I did not know how to say it. Not to you, not to anyone." She paused, her gaze dropping again. "And maybe I said things I should not have said, but that does not mean I meant all of it," she added, the words landing softer, more fragile. Ethan listened, his head tilting slightly, not dismissive, not accepting, simply present, and when she finished, he let the silence settle again before he spoke. "You said you were leaving," he said, not as a question, but as a statement, A single thread pulled cleanly from everything else she had said, and Victoria hesitated, just for a second, before answering. "I thought I was," she replied, her voice quieter now, less certain than before. "But I did not expect this." She gestured faintly around them, not quite meeting his eyes. "I did not expect to see you here, to hear myself like that," she admitted, and for the first time, there was no attempt to justify, no attempt to reshape, only a small, honest acknowledgement of the moment she was now standing in. Ethan exhaled slowly, his gaze shifting briefly toward the windshield, toward the driveway ahead, the gates still closed, still waiting, and then back to her, his expression unchanged but settled, as if he had already reached a place she had not yet found. "You did not expect to be heard," he said quietly, and the words landed with a calm finality that carried more weight than anything louder could have. And Victoria did not respond, because there was nothing to respond to, only the truth of it, sitting between them, clear and undeniable, as the night remained still around them, holding the moment in place just long enough for both of them to understand exactly what had changed. The silence did not break all at once. It dissolved slowly, like the last trace of rain evaporating from warm pavement, leaving behind something quieter, something permanent, and Ethan shifted his gaze forward again, away from her, away from the mirror, toward the closed gates that stood just a few feet ahead, unchanged, unmoved, waiting without urgency. And for a moment, he simply sat there, his hands resting loosely on the wheel, his posture steady, his breath even, as if the weight of everything that had just been revealed had already settled into a place where it no longer needed to move. Victoria did not reach for the door again, her hands still folded in her lap, her fingers no longer tense, just still, as if movement itself required a certainty she no longer had. And her eyes lingered on him, searching, not for an answer this time, but for something she could hold on to, something that might tell her what came next. But Ethan did not offer it, not because he was withholding, but because there was nothing left to give in the way she was expecting. The faint mist on the windshield began to clear as the defroster hummed softly, revealing the driveway more clearly now, the soft lights tracing its curve inward, a path that had once felt familiar, predictable, but now seemed distant, almost unreachable. And Ethan finally moved, not abruptly, not dramatically, just a small, deliberate shift as he reached for the gear and placed the car back into drive. The motion quiet, controlled, the kind that did not ask for permission or acknowledgement. Victoria's breath caught slightly at the sound, her body reacting before her thoughts could follow, and she turned her head just enough to watch him, her voice softer now, almost careful. "Ethan, where are you going?" she asked. The question simple but carrying everything she had not yet said, everything she did not yet understand, and he did not look back at her when he answered, his eyes remaining on the road ahead, his voice calm, grounded. "Forward," he said, a single word, steady and unshaken, and it was not avoidance, it was not dismissal, it was direction. The car rolled forward slowly, not toward the gates, but away from them, the tires gliding over the damp pavement with a soft, continuous sound, and the lights of the driveway began to slip out of view behind them, fading into the darkness as the street opened up again, wider now, emptier, and Victoria turned slightly in her seat, glancing back through the rear window as the place she had been so certain about moments ago disappeared from sight, her expression no longer resolved, no longer certain, but quiet, suspended between what she had chosen and what she had lost. Inside the cab, the air felt different now, not heavy, not tense, but still, as if everything unnecessary had been stripped away, leaving only what remained. And Ethan kept driving, his movements smooth, controlled, his presence no longer hidden, no longer divided between who he was and who he had pretended to be, but unified, grounded in something that did not need explanation. Victoria looked down at her hands, her fingers slowly uncurling, resting open against her lap, and for a long moment, she said nothing, because there was nothing left that could change what had already happened, no words that could return them to where they had been before the ride began, and the quiet hum of the engine carried them forward through the city, past the lights, past the reflections, into a space where the past no longer held the same shape. And as the cab moved steadily down the empty street, The only sound that remained was the soft rhythm of the road beneath them, and the silence that followed, not empty, not waiting, but complete.